they can do everything, which really kind of makes it nearly impossible to defend.
Who better to preview a game between Dan Quinn and Dan Campbell than Dan Pizzuta? That's right, we got our own Dan. DP, what's going on, dude?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing well as well. We love a Dan Bowl. We love a Dan Bowl. Let me just ask you straight up to start this. The number one key to this game, like the biggest deciding factor for you on Saturday night between the Commanders and Lions is what?
I think it's going to end up being what this Detroit defense looks like, and it's something that was, a bit of a concern over the second half of the season after there were so many injuries. And then we kind of saw it completely turn around in that game against the Vikings, where they were able to play a lot of man coverage. They were able to blitz. And that really put Sam Darnold in a bad place, which we kind of saw again this past weekend. I'm very interested to see how Detroit is going to structure their defense. They are a defense that wants to play man coverage. They want to blitz. You do that against Jaden Daniels. He's been one of the better quarterbacks in the league against the blitz this season. We saw Tampa Bay last week. They tried to blitz him a whole bunch, and that just did not work. He tore the blitz up. So if Detroit is going to be in that type of defense, they're going to be aggressive. How Washington is able to handle that, if they can be good against the blitz and man coverage, make this game a shootout, that's how this game, I think, becomes really close.
So I'm glad you mentioned both the things, like the general and the specific thing you just mentioned, because literally my next question on my notes is Detroit's defense good? Which we could answer in a second, but I was peeling through all those the next gen stats earlier, and basically Daniels had the best rookie season by any quarterback against the blitz since at least 2016. He was number one since 2016, not just this year, in yardage, touchdowns, basically every passer rating, every statistical category, and his EPA total against the blitz was more than double any other rookie quarterback this year. But it's an identity piece for Detroit as well. So I guess part one, Dan, is Detroit's defense actually good? And two, if the fastball of blitzing might be a bad idea against Daniels, do they have a changeup?
So they are. I think they are good. It's structurally, I like a lot of the things that they do, because they are going to stay doing what they want to do. And I think you even see kind of, especially in their, the man coverage things, even though they don't have a lot of the cornerbacks that they were expected to have, their ability to communicate and pass things off, and there isn't a lot of open space or coverage busts when you see that, even though they don't have those top cornerbacks out there. So they are, I think, structurally sound. They have a lot of guys that have played there for a couple years, so that certainly helps them. They have been able to get pressure even when they don't blitz. So Darius Smith, I think, has been very underrated. It might have been the only good trade deadline acquisition that happened this year, but he has been incredible as a singular pass rusher for Detroit. So they have been able to combine some of those things, and we have seen them. They are capable of giving up some chunk plays, because sometimes that blitz pressure does not get home, and you have a quarterback who can beat that. But I'm not sure how much of a changeup they have, because they are so singularly focused on doing what they do. But to this point, it has been good. So I think they are going to kind of go down with the ship if that doesn't work. But on the other side, they do have an offense that is going to be able to score points on pretty much anyone. So they do kind of have a leeway a little bit there, where if they are giving up some points, they have an offense that's going to be able to make up for it too.
Dan Pizzuta, writer for the 33rd Team, with us here on the Hoffman Show. You mentioned that they have all these backups in, and I feel like if everybody knows, or if anybody out there listening knows one thing about the Detroit defense, it's like those guys are really banged up. They've gotten Alex Anzalone back. They're hoping to have Terrion Arnold, who was hurt in Week 18, back for this game, and looks like they will. Who knows if he's 100%. But you mentioned structurally, they haven't changed a lot. Have they had to change it all? Because I think one of the things that's interesting about Detroit is they have a level of continuity with their coordinators and their coaching staff and a lot of their players that you typically don't get in the NFL, because when you're this good, your guys get poached. And for whatever reason, Aaron Glenn doesn't have a head coaching job yet, although that might change within the next month. And we all know the story with Ben Johnson on the other side that we'll talk about in a second. So they should have this like incredible extended continuity, but when all the players leave middle of the season because they're all hurt, typically teams have to veer. Have they actually done that, or have they actually been so good teaching this defense that you week to week aren't seeing any structural differences despite all of the pieces that are missing?
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much kind of what it has been. There hasn't been a lot of change-ups when you kind of look at their blitz rates. Just specifically, you go down game by game. The only game this year they've been under 20, the 2 games under 20%. One was week 1 against the Rams, and then when they played the Bears in week 13. Everything else, they have still been bringing it as much as they can. Over the past couple weeks, they've even really doubled down. Since week 14, they've had some of their highest blitz rates of the season. So not only have they not changed up, they've leaned even further into what they've been doing. And that is something that I think they just have kind of they're going to live with some of the high variance. And if we're not going to be able to create pressure with 4, we're not going to be able to hold up in man coverage on our own. Something is going to work. So if we can get that extra blitz, we can put that pressure. That's going to take some of the pressure off of our corners to be holding on for as long as maybe they would if we just rush 4 and the pass rush didn't come home. So they are just trying to play this high variance game, and they've leaned even further into it over the past couple of weeks. So that their change up right now is throwing harder.
I don't think that's how changeups work in baseball, but hey, it's a football analogy. We can do whatever we want. Dan Pizzuta with us from the on the Hoffman Show from the 33rd team. So if I was Detroit, I'd also want to play a high variance game, because if I miss, if I give up a touchdown, then my offense just gets to go back on the field, and I'm perfectly fine with that. So if you're Washington and you're Cliff, and especially if you're Dan Quinn, and you're thinking about this game holistically, how much risk do you actually want to take? Knowing they're going to give you opportunities to take shots, do you just have to take them? Or do you try to kind of pull in the reins and play a game script that much more resembles what you did last week against Tampa?
Yeah, I think you probably lean a little bit toward the latter there, because just no matter, I think, what you do against Detroit, really, like, they're going to be able to do what they want to do. And they are just a team that is built so well offensively that it doesn't really matter what kind of game they are playing. They're going to be able to do it. If you're going to make them run, they're going to be able to do it behind that offensive line. Jahmyr Gibbs now taking a full reign of that offense as the top running back has been great. If you have going to make them drop back to pass, that is still something they are going to be able to do, even though everyone knows that Jared Goff is going to be throwing over the middle of the field into that intermediate area. There is apparently nothing anyone can do to stop them, because as soon as you put your linebackers back there to drop back into coverage, that's when they're going to run, and that hole is kind of a bit of a gap there in the middle of the field, and that offensive line is going to be pushing. So it's a kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't type of way to defend against Detroit, and that's kind of what they've taken advantage of all year. So I think if you are Washington, you do have that ability to kind of control the clock a little bit, have some of that run. You do have Jaden Daniels who's going to be able to control that on his own with his legs. And then I think you take some of those shot plays when the blitzes come and when those opportunities come, and that's probably going to be your best chance to win too.
So on the other side of the ball, that fantastic Detroit offense, first of all, is a guy who you watch a ton of offensive tape. You do your quarterback rankings, like the way that you write about football. I mean, obviously you're also watching what the defense is doing too, but like I feel like you're a guy who just has a great feel for different schemes and how things are kind of rolling around the league. How would you try to describe this Detroit offense and what makes it so special and what makes it so potent?
They can do everything, which really kind of makes it nearly impossible to defend. Kind of like I was saying, they have their one go-to. Jared Goff wants to throw that dig over the middle of the field, and like I said, it's so hard to defend it, because if you're a defensive coordinator, you say, okay, we need to drop our linebackers back. Then you do that, and then you're giving up ground in the run game, and they'll Detroit is they're probably the one team that is more willing to take that more than any other team in the league. So they have that where you're fighting in the middle of the field. Even when you have Amon-Ra St. Brown right now in that just middle of the field being that possession receiver. You have Sam Laporta who can do a similar thing as a tight end matching up either against, a linebacker or a slot corner. I think the big thing that's really changed this year for Detroit, especially in the passing game, is Jameson Williams actually coming on as being a legitimate big play threat, not just as a deep threat. He's been taking some shorter passes, running after the catch, and he's gotten some of these schemed open things. So they just have so many ways to win. It's that they can kill you death by 1,000 cuts with, throwing to Amon-Ra St. Brown for, 5 yards at a time. That's going to continually pick up a first down. But then they also have this incredibly explosive option with Jameson Williams, who can just take off at any point at the field. And there's no singular way to beat this Detroit offense right now. It's just a well-oiled machine, really, at anything they're trying to do structurally, and it's been really fun to watch.
Yeah, and also just they have answers for everything because it's this Sean Payton, really verbose. Like, they always have a couple of plays at the line of scrimmage. Whatever look you're in, they can get a play they like. It's just a gross offense because not only structurally is it so good, their players are so good. And then you have to figure out what you want to do on your side of it. And I think it's another interesting, underrated, but very nerdy and important part of this game, Dan, is what does Washington do personnel-wise? Because Detroit plays heavier than almost any team in the league. They use that sixth offensive lineman and Dan Skipper a lot. They use fullbacks. They use two tight ends. And Washington plays at nickel at basically a higher rate, if not literally at a higher rate than anyone else in the league. Do you think that winds up having some kind of impact one way or another, the speed of Washington being an advantage or the lightness of Washington being a disadvantage on Saturday night?
Yeah, I mean that's kind of one of the things too, where it's so hard to match up with them because no matter what you do, they're going to have a counter for it. I think I would still stay lighter if I'm Washington because I think that just kind of puts your best defenders on the field, and I think if you are just kind of going into trying to stop what they can do, I think you want as many good players on the field as you can. So if you're getting a little weaker by going into base defense, that probably takes that a little bit away. So I think you do have these defensive backs who are willing to come up and fit the run. And I think that has been something that has worked for Washington so far this season. So I think that's probably the game plan they go with, kind of sticking with what they've been instead of completely trying to change what they've been doing structurally. I think sitting in nickel, I think it is probably still the best way to defend it, even though Detroit is going to try to go heavy and try to really just kind of bully them out of it.
This is such a dumb procedural question, but I'm going to ask you because I think you'll know the answer. When Washington plays a 3 safety look a lot too, which might be a nice way to maybe split the difference there, like a big nickel. When all these tracking services do that, or kind of capture that, are they counting that as nickel? So when you say Washington plays more nickel, is that truly 3 corners, 2 safeties, or are they counting that as 5 defensive backs and thus nickel?
Yes, when we're looking at a lot of the tracking services, that's going to be just based on the defensive backs on the field. So 4 defensive backs are going to be considered base, 5 will be nickel, 6 dime. So it's not necessarily telling you the exact structure of the defense, which is why I kind of like to go in and look at a lot of these things. But yeah, when you're looking at, someone's telling you how much, nickel they played, it's just that 5 defensive backs are on the field. Doesn't necessarily split out between who the defensive backs are, especially because there's so many just versatile defensive backs in the league right now. So it would be very hard to kind of completely match what the defensive back structure is. So when you're looking at how many defensive backs on the field, that's what these next gen stats and PFF, that's what they're charting.
Okay, I figured you would, one, know, and B, have even more insight on it, but it is worth mentioning, and, Detroit's got one of those in Brian Branch. What is he? Depends on the play. And also, right. It's worth mentioning that offenses operate that way as well. There's a lot of teams that are technically in 12 personnel, but that second tight end's acting as a fullback, so it lines up like 21, or, most teams actually treat the Commanders' 12 personnel with Zach Ertz on the field as if it's 11 11, where there's just one tight end out there because they just treat Ertz as a wide receiver. So always fun chess match to watch. Okay, real quick, before we let go of Dan Pizzuta here, always appreciate his time on Thursdays during football season. Let's take a look at the other games, Dan. Texans and Chiefs. Kansas City's favored by 8 here, and a lot of people are like, I don't know, Texans they showed us something last weekend. Do you have faith that they can put together two performances, that are quality here, or do you think Kansas City comes out, their offense started to look even better towards the end of the year, and that the Chiefs are going to wind up in their 172nd straight AFC title game?
Yeah, I kind of lean toward the latter. It was fun to see what Houston was able to do last week. And I think it really was a lot of what we've seen from Houston all season, where that defense has been incredible. Like, I think it's been underrated how good that defense was. Great pass rushers. Those corners have been fantastic, and they kind of all showed up. The problem is when you have go against a team like the Chiefs, you're not going to sack Patrick Mahomes. So the edge rushers, as good as they are not going to play as big of a part. And because this offense does not have, a number one receiver, and they're going to be kind of throwing all over the place. The number one receiver really is a tight end. That's going to take these two outside corners away from, being the strength. So I think we see that. And then offensively, CJ Stroud was much better in the second half. He still wasn't great. And the first half was really a lot of what we've seen from Houston for most of the season. Inefficient runs on first and second down put CJ Stroud in third and long, and he's going to try to force some passes. And he was throwing not just some bad passes, but some bad decisions in the first half. And then things kind of turned around a little bit. He used the middle of the field much better, which is, again, going to be something hard to do for Kansas City. So I'm always going to really lean Chiefs, to be honest. Whenever there is a playoff game, I'm not going to be stupid enough to pick against them because they've made a lot of people look dumb that way. But I think they do, as we just saw a couple weeks ago, I think they match up with Houston, and I think their strengths are better, and I think they take away what Houston's strengths are too. And I don't really think this is going to be a close matchup.
I totally agree with that. Obviously, Commanders and Lions on Saturday night. Typically I don't ask you for game picks, but heck, there's only 4 games this weekend, and this is the one that most people that listening are caring about. Do you give the Commanders a chance to win this, or do you think ultimately the Lions are just way too much, and you're picking Detroit, and whether it's to cover the 9.5 or something close to that?
Yeah, I think they can cover it, and I think it really kind of depends on what this Detroit defense looks like for like the first 2 drives. If Detroit's defense is locked in and they look like they did against Minnesota in that regular season finale, I think it's going to be really tough. But if it looks like it was, over the couple of weeks beforehand where they were, playing in shootouts, I think if this does turn into a shootout, Washington's going to be able to keep it closer than I think a lot of other people might be giving them credit for.
So for the Sunday games, starting with Eagles and Rams, I find the Rams the most difficult team to predict in the league because they can be the best team in football and then totally incompetent on back-to-back weeks. Do you have, as someone who's probably watched a lot more of them, is there any way to predict what the Los Angeles Rams will be on any given weekend? And such, what do you think they will be this weekend against the Philadelphia Eagles?
So to answer the first question, absolutely not. There is no way to figure out what the Rams are going to be. At the Rams' peak, they can hang with anybody. The problem is that peak does not show up in every game. You have a game like they had against the Bills where they just looked absolutely unstoppable. And then they didn't score 20 points for the next 3 weeks. And so it's very frustrating to watch. And, I think there was during that first drive, I think I tweeted out, "Oh, this is going to be one of those Matthew Stafford games." And then he had that he got hit, the fumble that turned into the incompletion by Rule. And after that, I was like, "Oh, this is going to be one of those Matthew Stafford games." It's the same question, different inflection, and they both kind of summarize what the Rams are going to be. At their height, they're very good. I'm very interested to see if this Rams defense can keep it up because the Eagles offense was not very good last week. But I think we've seen with the Eagles so many times, you let them hang around just long enough there's going to be someone with enough talent to break through. And we saw that was Zach Ertz last week. It's been Saquon so many other times this season. But if this Rams defense can do what they did last week, and they were doing a lot of fun stuff. They were winning one-on-ones with a four-man rush. They were using some sim pressures. They were blitzing at perfectly timed the intervals that really made it difficult for Minnesota to do whatever they wanted. And so if this defense can hang on and have a performance somewhat similar to what they did last week, I think this can be a pretty close game too.
Yeah, I mean, the Eagles are enigmatic as well. It's just eventually, like you said, their talent, they're typically enigmatic for three quarters, and their just talent is overwhelming. Speaking of overwhelming talents, the MVP matchup on Sunday night, how do you think this one goes down? Obviously, Baltimore beat the ever-living, out of Buffalo earlier this year. Can this Buffalo team that's much better now than they were then hang with Baltimore?
Yeah, I mean, this is a game where I just want to sit back and watch because it should be really fun. And it really is a shame that one of these teams has to lose because especially the way these two quarterbacks have been playing, neither one of them deserves to have an off season after a divisional round loss. It is just, it's so unfair, to be in the AFC right now compared to what, some of the teams in the NFC have to go through. I'm going to be real interested to see how these teams personnel-wise decide to match up with each other. We know Buffalo has been using the 6 offensive linemen a whole lot, and I think Baltimore has the ability to, play against that kind of no matter what structure. Kyle Hamilton is one of those guys who we have seen is that defensive back who can move around, can play like a linebacker, can be a slot corner. Their defense has been great since he moved to a full-time, deep safety, but I think in a game like this, they'll move him around a little more. What's interesting is last week, Baltimore used a 6 offensive lineman as much as Buffalo did last week too. So they went super heavy, and just when you have that read option, that's all they were doing. It was like back in 2012, there was nothing really crazy about it. But when you have to pick between defending Lamar and Derrick Henry, there's no right answer. So when they have that, and then that opens up so many things in the pass game, I think this is really going to be a chess match. I'm so interested to see how these teams match up, especially if Baltimore does go heavy. We talk about teams that go in nickel. Buffalo is the heaviest nickel team in the league. They do it on 97% of their snaps. So if they're going to be light and Baltimore is just running out with either 2 tight ends, they do the 2 running backs with Patrick Ricard. They do sometimes with Ricard and 2 tight ends. They have that 6 offensive linemen. I think that's going to be very interesting how these teams decide to match up with each other. And I think we just have 2 quarterbacks playing at the highest level they've ever played at right now. So this is definitely going to be, the game of the weekend.
Can't wait for it. Wish we had more time to talk about it, but alas, spent a lot of time talking about what should be a good one Saturday night too between the Commanders and the Lions. Dan Pizzuta joining us all season long on Thursdays. Hope that we'll be talking about another Commanders game, previewing the NFC Championship game next week. We'll see whether Washington's there or not, but Dan will be here, and we're looking forward to it. DP, always appreciate you, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Have a good one.
This is the Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and the Odyssey app.